want to welcome James Duncan for our first session today as we explore some common organizational pitfalls that will hopefully allow us to look at our organization slightly differently. James is one of the founders of Stance, a boutique consultancy that focuses on helping organizations to understand how they can make themselves better at what they do. Prior to founding Stance, James was a civil servant in the government's digital service in charge of the Public Services Network and developed the strategy for the UK's Crown hosting service. He also brings with him 15 years of experience as a technologist and entrepreneur. James, thank you so much for being here. I'll turn the mic over to you.
Thanks, Amanda, and good morning, everyone, or at least I think it's morning somewhere. For me, it's early evening because I'm based in Dorset in the UK, and as Amanda said there, for a long time, I was a tech entrepreneur, and I split my time pretty evenly between London and Silicon Valley, and in fact, the Laurentians just north of Montreal. And that was all before I became a civil servant in the British government. These days, again, as Amanda said, I'm a partner in a consultancy called Stance, and it's our mission to really help organizations, predominantly in the public sector, but not always, figure out how to deal with the realities of being an organization in 2021 rather than 2001. But working out how to harness the capabilities that technology affords us wasn't really an obvious place for me to have ended up in, unless it was the capabilities of agricultural technology, because I grew up in rural Ontario, about halfway between Ottawa and Montreal. And looking back, it seems unlikely, but for a long time when I was growing up, we had a party line to the house. Now, some of you might know what that is, but many of you won't, and I'd imagine that comparatively few of you who have heard of it would have actually experienced it. To a teenager in rural Canada, it was about as close to the opposite of a party as you could possibly get. It was essentially a normal landline like you'd have into your house today, but instead of just connecting to your house, it connected to a bunch of others too. And that seems almost unbelievable in this day and age. And it did seem unbelievable to me at the time as well, because we literally shared our telephone line, not just with each other in the house, but with all our neighbors. So you'd pick up the phone to make a call, but one of your neighbors would be using it already, just jabbering away about nothing important, or at least it didn't seem like it to you as a teenager. And of course, now we don't really have phone numbers that are connected to the vague geography of a house, or in my case, a group of farmhouses. Instead, we have a phone number to an individual person. So in my 42 years of life, the world has totally changed, and organizations have had to change to keep up, but most haven't. And most organizations that set out to transform themselves fail. In 2008, this document was declassified. It's a manual written in 1944 by the forerunner of the CIA on how to disrupt organizations, basically sabotage them. And you may have seen it, but if you haven't, you really should Google it, because I think it makes for some really incredible reading. The general advice inside this document is for workers who just want to cause problems inside their orgs, and it includes talking as frequently as possible and at great length, bringing up irrelevant issues as often as you can, haggling over the precise wordings of communications, minutes, and resolutions, referring back to matters previously decided upon, and worrying about the propriety of any decision. It also suggests things that managers can do, like misunderstand instructions and ask endless questions, or engage in long correspondence about them, or have meetings when there's much more critical work to be done, and to multiply the procedures and clearances involved in issuing any new instructions. I don't know if this is a manual as much as it is a precise and accurate prediction of their future and many of our presents. This article was written a bit more recently. It was written in March of this year, in fact, in like Tech Weekly, CIO Trends, web magazine book thing. I don't really know. It's not unique. There are many others like it. I picked this one not because it's particularly good, but because it was the top of the Google search, and it's a meaningful representation of just about every article on why digital transformations fail. It's got some numbers in it, 70%. It quotes a consultant person and an analyst firm person and a software company person. It claims to give insight into why transformations fail. And because of that, it sort of tells you that your digital transformation is likely to fail too. And truth be told, it probably will, but not for the reasons that the article will tell you. You'll read this article and you'll learn that you don't have the right mindset, that you don't have the right culture, that you've not hired the right people. Apparently, your goals are all wrong, you've not bought the right technology, and you gave up too quickly when success didn't come quite as easily as you might have thought. Now, all of these things might be true, but that doesn't mean the article is even approaching an orbit in which it might be right, because these 6 things are enumerated as they are for one reason and one reason alone, and that is to sell you stuff. Numbers 1, 2, and 3 set themselves up as the excuse for any and all failure. Number 4, well, that'll have you pay some management consultancy that was established 40 or 50 years ago to tell you all about the Emerald City. Number 5 will have you buy an industry report that tells you to buy some industry tech. There will be a silver bullet. And number 6 is to convince you to keep throwing good money after bad, because 1, 2, and 3 can be used and will be used to excuse any and all failure. If you think I sound vaguely exercised about this, you're right, I really am. There are basically 3 approaches that organizations try. The first approach, approach number 1, is to essentially expand the remit of the IT department and change its name. Let's call it digital. Often that means some kind of maturity model analysis of the tooling, perhaps a capability assessment of the existing staff, and a gap analysis prior to hiring people into new roles, and boom, it's done, apparently. But it doesn't really feel or seem like your organization is doing anything new. Approach number 2 is to create and isolate a new part of the organization, call it digital or the cool kids or something like that. Anyway, the idea is that you let them get on with making the new stuff, let them use the tools they want to use and deliver at pace, often bypassing some of the traditional controls of the organization to ensure they're able to get things done. You invest in this group and they will be the catalyst of change for the rest of the organization. Except it'll seem like the rest of the organization doesn't really want to get along with that change very well at all. And then there's approach 3. And this is the one that is usually tried last because it's the hardest, and it's not something you're going to hear in any analyst report or from many of the big management consultancies. And I'm not going to give you this one yet. We'll get there, trust me, but you need to wait because the odds are that one of the following 3 things are true. Your organization is considering one of the first 2 approaches. Your organization has failed at one or both of the first 2 approaches, or 3, you're stuck deep in the bowels of one of them. And to understand why approach 3 is the only real option, you have to understand why approach 1 and 2 prove so challenging to so many organizations. And to do this, I'm going to do what I often do in my talks and use a little bit of historical comparison. With that comes an important disclaimer. All historical comparisons are invalid. My intent here is not to show you that the Industrial Revolution is the same as the Digital Revolution, because it ain't. But there are similarities between the 2, and those similarities shouldn't be ignored. The Industrial Revolution started in around 1760. It's hard to say that the development of any single thing kicked it off. It was more of a series of developments that occurred roughly simultaneously, and then the whole thing wasn't considered over until about 1840, so nearly 100 years later. And the interesting thing about the Industrial Revolution is that when you look at the list of things that it industrialized, it seems a bit parochial. A more efficient way to weave cotton than a seed drill doesn't really feel like the stuff of today, and that's because it wasn't. The real stuff that we all grew up with and think of as industrial happened in the Second Industrial Revolution. Like the first one, the timeline's pretty debatable, but more or less from the 1860s to the 1930s, when the effects of standardization and componentization compounded, and they let us start to build things that hadn't been built before at a scale that had never been possible before. A business that was designed around the capabilities of the first industrial revolution wouldn't expect to compete with a business in the second one, because many of the outputs in that first revolution weren't of interest to the consumer. The first industrial revolution solved the problems of the past. And in any change of era, you get a blurring between what is past and what is now. It's why for a while we called a car a horseless carriage. It was at that moment, when we called it a horseless carriage, where the line blurred between what was happening now with what had been happening before. It was a sign that a new world of tomorrow was coming. And in many ways, the first industrial revolution was all about applying the new technologies to the world of yesterday. But it did establish the key pieces of scaffolding that an industrial society needed for society to act in an industrial way. And in doing so, it meant that millions of people could do new things and might want other things, while other people really did get left behind. Anyone that's lived in the UK for any length of time will almost certainly recognize these words as those of the poet William Blake in his poem Jerusalem. It's almost become an English national anthem, and it really speaks to the truth of the Second Industrial Revolution. It wasn't just about the gains that mechanization made. The Industrial Revolution was as much about the gains that can be made when hundreds of thousands of people that formerly worked in agriculture became so desperate for money that they would do almost anything to survive. The second industrial revolution used that mass of new workers to create new categories of products that had never existed before, for a middle class that had never existed before. The second industrial revolution happened, at least in part, because of that new huge pool of otherwise unused labor. And something similar happened with computation. In the dark ages, before computation, you'd have had a team of people working on, say, the payroll for your organization. They would have done all the calculations and the accounting and worked it all out and then distributed the money to whoever had earned it. And people would do those things. In my high school, I did an accounting module thing, and we did it by hand just like this, with like a paper ledger, and it was awful, even for the imaginary purposes that we were practicing with. But then computation arrived, and it broke everything. Not because it wasn't better, it materially was, but because more people were no longer needed. So about 40 years ago, and it could be longer depending on the size or the shape of your organization, but more or less then, organizations everywhere were investing in computers and software to run on them. Things like payroll and timesheets, maybe even things like skills and workforce management, all of it could be automated, and so everyone kind of was doing it by using computers and writing software. But then 22 years into that process, a guy called Nicholas Carr wrote Does IT Matter in the Harvard Business Review. And he pointed out that if every company has used computers and written software to automate all of the same things, then there's no real advantage to having done so. Information technology becomes just a cost of doing business. And that was a really valuable insight, but it was an insight that came at roughly the same time that the internet had stopped being a plaything and was starting to have a genuine impact on people's lives. Ubiquitous computing and networking were creating new opportunities, the likes of which hadn't been seen since the Second Industrial Revolution, when things that had never existed before came into being for the first time. In 2011, Marc Andreessen captured it probably best when he wrote an essay that pointed out that software was eating the world. That is to say that every single interaction that people have with other people, people have with organizations, organizations have with people, and organizations have with other organizations, can now be enhanced through the application of software that is very, very specific to that interaction. And because it's so specific, no company can sell you the software to enhance that interaction. The enhancement of the interaction is what defines the product. It's not a cost of doing business, it is the business. Everything about the 22 years prior to Nicholas Carr writing that article told him that IT did, in fact, not make a difference, that it was just a cost of doing business. But that was only true when applying the tools of tomorrow to the world of yesterday. And just as the first industrial revolution was all about creating the table stakes for the second industrial revolution, those first 22 years of computing in business were all about creating the means for what was to come. One of the reasons it's been so easy to buy software off the shelf and install it in an organization after organization is that, well, they all look a bit like this. I mean, if you ignore the name and the high degree of nepotism in this image, an organization that has a VP of finance and a VP of tech and ops or whatever is a really familiar looking thing. And it's familiar because it probably looks like most of the organizations that most of us have ever worked in. And the thing is, this diagram, it doesn't come from a real company. I didn't download it from Google image search or get it out of an annual report. This is the default org chart that PowerPoint creates for you if you want to make an org chart. I mean, if we treated our marketing materials the same way we design our organizations, we'd use a Microsoft Office template, we'd change the words and send it to the printers. Why is that? It's strange. So in 1940, the continent of Europe had fallen to Nazi Germany, and Britain, its very far-flung empire, found itself standing alone against that war machine. The United States wouldn't enter the war until the end of 1941, and Churchill was desperately trying to secure supply lines to keep the country fed and fighting, and the only way to do that was to get the needed supplies from elsewhere in the world, primarily the Commonwealth, but also from its friend but not yet ally, the United States. Britain's merchant navy wasn't big enough, and what was worse, it was being sunk by the German U-boat threat faster than it could be replaced, so something had to be done. That simple fact was the origin of the emergency shipbuilding program, and that was really the point at which, for the Allies at least, the Second Industrial Revolution came to its end. It's hard to overstate the scale of the shipbuilding that resulted from taking the gains in effectiveness from the Second Industrial Revolution and focusing purely on enhancing efficiency. At the start of 1942, it took 240 days to build a ship. And to me, that still feels quite quick. I mean, I've got a fence I've been putting up for longer than that, but by the end of 1942, it took an average of just 56 days to build one of these things. 56 days, that's incredible. Between 1940 and the end of 1945, the United States industrial base built some 6,000 of these Liberty ships. That's 3 every single day. And the production of these ships was so efficient and such a point of pride that on a couple of occasions, the shipbuilders constructed stunt ships as a sort of race against time to see just how fast they could do it if they dropped all other concerns. And so while the normal production was never quite at this pace, the 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes that it took from the time the SS Robert E. Peary's keel plate was laid down to the time when she was launched will always be an impressive number in my mind, especially when you remember that this was the work of actual human people, building, welding, riveting, moving gigantic hunks of steel to achieve what probably would have been considered impossible. During the Second Industrial Revolution, humanity constructed the fabric of the modern world. All the pieces were in place and most of the product categories had already come into existence. In the Second World War, necessity tempered and hardened our effectiveness, and it compelled us to make things as efficiently as we could. And from the end of the Second World War to the turn of the century, for the most part, management has been all about making the complex systems that had been developed during the Second Industrial Revolution more efficient. I mean, sure, we invented some new things, but those things were largely in the same category as other things that we'd had previously. And so the management process in that post-war, pre-century period just became all about delivering those things as efficiently as possible. And it's where most of us get most of our ideas about most of the things that we do in management. And it's why, and one of the reasons why this type of organization is so popular. When we know what we're doing and how we're doing it, this type of functionally laid out organization makes some trade-offs of efficiency over effectiveness. But that trade is worthwhile because the efficiency gains outweigh the effectiveness losses. But in these times, when software is eating the world and products that have never existed before are coming into being, organizations that look like this should be a warning sign to us that we're doing something wrong. Because this model works when our effectiveness had reached a point where, barring some specific sectoral mechanism, regulation, health and safety, that sort of thing, all organizations were basically the same. And for 60 years, we were just optimizing it. But premature optimization is the root of all evil. Almost every programmer worth their salt has heard this, and I'd imagine that many non-programmers have too. When this phrase was coined, it was trying to say that you don't know the bottlenecks of a complex system until the complex system is up and running. So it's important that you don't bother getting all focused on making tiny little improvements to the way things work. At least not until it's actually running and you can figure out where to make the right time investments to get the biggest efficiency payouts. The Second Industrial Revolution gave us the tools and capabilities that we needed to build a ship from scratch in a little over 4 days. We took those ideas and we took those methods and we ruthlessly applied them to every aspect of our lives to end up in car world, and we got nothing left to optimize. In car world, even information technology that freed up vast pools of labor became just a cost of doing business. Car world's a world where organizations aren't designed to do one thing. They're designed to do everything. They're designed to do nothing. That's why they all look the same. But we're not in car world anymore. We're playing in Andreessen world now, where software is eating everything. We're playing in spaces we know nothing about. And before we can become efficient, we must first become effective. At peak in car world, the system is already perfect, so any failure must be a failure of those operating the system. They've got the wrong mindset, the wrong culture, maybe they're just the wrong people. In car world, you're trying to fix the wrong things in the wrong ways using the wrong tools. Give it more time and the car world system will always, always prevail. But in Andreessen world, it doesn't, and it won't. There's a reason that we didn't go from the first industrial revolution to building a ship in 4 days overnight. It took the better part of a century, 70 years, before we really cracked it. So if you're using models that worked for peak car and you're trying to be a part of Andreessen world, then you're trying to use a spinning jenny to build a ship, and it's just not going to work. Now, I promised you that we'd apply some of that to what's happening now, and I'll try to keep that promise. The approach of revitalizing the IT department is doomed to fail, not because the people there aren't smart, capable, really brilliant individuals, because they are, but they're almost certainly schooled in how IT works by something we call the IT industrial complex. You see, when Nicholas Carr wrote Does IT Matter?, software vendors got really worried because if IT didn't matter anymore, wasn't their lucrative revenue going to dry right up? In short, no, they needn't have worried at all. The interpretation of Nicholas Carr's article was pretty much the same everywhere. Stop investing in software engineering and start buying software off the shelf. And there are a handful of reasons why that's really good thinking. I mean, first of all, writing software, even now, is really uncertain. We've been trying to do it for the last 50 years or so, and we're genuinely bad at it. It goes wrong all the time. And if you're, for example, a company who sells electricity and you're paying people to build software to run your payroll, it feels like a silly investment. And it probably is. Your company's in car world, and it's no different from any other company. Building your own payroll software is not going to help you get an advantage over the other electricity selling companies. So why would you do it? What you want instead is a commodity. But why specifically a commodity? What does that mean? All technologies evolve. When they start out, they're novel and new, and they've never been seen before. And after a while, there's more than one example of those things, but they're bespoke, and they're repeatedly recreated for different customers. But once the problem that those things solve is understood well enough, products begin to emerge, and the products seek to differentiate themselves. For example, one watch might differentiate itself on the basis of its color. By me, I'm bold and bright and yellow. My display lights up so you can tell the time at night. Excuse me. Well, another watch might project an image of stark simplicity that underlies a hidden, complex, blah, blah, I don't know. Products are marketed as filling all kinds of rubbish categories because products are trying to fit the particular niche that you as a consumer might want to be filled. But those products eventually become ubiquitous. Everybody has them. They've all got the same features. They've become commodities. And the only important thing really is the cost of acquisition. In theory, a commodity is a basic good that is interchangeable with other goods of the same type. You can source it from multiple suppliers, and as long as the supplier is reliable, it doesn't matter where you got it from, because it's just the same as every other example of the good. And so if you're trying to optimize a cost of doing business in your organization, the thing you want is a commodity. Software vendors, of course, hated that. And when people are involved in selling the product, the idea of selling a commodity sounds terrible, like a race to the bottom. And software, that problem is especially bad because there isn't really a cost of production beyond the initial investment of software engineering time. So that race to the bottom feels literally bottomless. Needless to say, software vendors didn't produce commodities, and frankly, IT departments wouldn't know how to buy them even if they did. For years, they'd thought in terms of all the fantastic features they offered, and CAR's realization didn't change that, it just changed who they hired. Rather than hiring software engineers, they hired people who knew how to source, compare, and buy products, and some other people who knew how to support them. And that means our organizations got worse at knowing how to make computers do the things that we wanted, but got better at buying software. And that meant our organizations turned to analyst firms for guidance about what to buy and when to buy it. Things like this get produced with dots representing products plotted upon it, and there's no science behind this sort of thing. It's done by analysts, but it's bereft of anything that would pass as actual scientific analysis. When a product category gets to the appropriate place on this chart that any given company feels comfortable, a demand will be artificially created, a program will be introduced to buy and install the thing. And of course, the products only get to the plateau of productivity, which is where most organizations want to be, when major vendors start either acquiring and integrating smaller software vendors, or they build it themselves. Either way, for the most part, analysts basically tell organizations what to buy and when to buy it. Simultaneously, this product mentality concentrated everybody who knew anything at all about technology into one part of the organization that was seen as a cost center. And that meant that no other part of the organization really knew anything about technology at all, at least not institutionally. The first piece of technology that's done this way feels comparatively inexpensive. Remember, when this started, organizations were replacing really expensive teams of really expensive people who were developing software with a much smaller team of people doing product selection and implementation, and some others who supported it once it was done. Those two parts are very different beasts. So different, in fact, that we came up with operating models for information technology designed exactly around that difference. These things are built around the idea that there are a group of people that do change, and then another group of people who run and support. And in between, there's this weird transition phase where everyone has arguments about knowledge bases and service readiness. In our IT departments, the people who are expected to change things are evaluated on how much change they introduce. The more they introduce, the more effective they are seen to be. The support people, however, are evaluated on the stability they provide, or perhaps more truthfully, the lack of instability that occurs on their watch. If you're on the support side of the house, the very last thing you want is change. You want a small set of products you know to be highly reliable and nothing new that could come and break that. The elephant in the room, however, is that the number of products that a support organization has to support never gets any smaller. As our IT estates have gotten bigger and bigger, our IT departments have had to come up with a few mechanisms to cope. And the first mechanism that IT departments use is to simply place barriers to getting anything new. I bet that most of you have to go through some sort of approval process that has to be attended to if you want to use a piece of software that's not been installed on your work computer before or authorized previously by your IT department. And there are definitely good arguments for why these sorts of things happen: security, licensing, that sort of stuff. But those arguments also exist because our software vendors have tended to optimize their software for them to exist. The existence of these processes in the buyer's organization suits the supplier. And the next is more subtle. These products have become less interesting. They look similar, and they come from the same handful of vendors. For example, the reason why Microsoft Teams has now basically beaten Slack in most organizations isn't because it was a better product per se. I mean, it might be, it might not. I don't care. I don't like either. But it was definitely easier to roll out for organizations that already had support teams familiar with Microsoft products. Our support teams have had to become broad in the range of products they support, but shallow in terms of the knowledge about these products, because deep knowledge about something is expensive, and our IT teams are a cost of doing business designed for car world, where efficiency is the goal. Broad and shallow can be supported by a smaller number of people. Broad and shallow is for car world. The support part of an organization wants to prevent instability, and it wants to make sure that when problems do occur, it has the tools it needs to address them. This is by design in tension with the part of the organization that wants to introduce new capabilities, to change things, and to provide new opportunities through technology. Arguments about service transition and readiness reviews aren't fraught because build didn't do enough documentation or because support people aren't the right people. They're fraught because the incentives of the two parts of the organization are misaligned in an irreconcilable way, and this makes doing anything new incredibly hard. And this is where the approach of making your information technology department responsible for digital transformation likely to fail. Despite being called information technology, they're almost certainly a group of people that are skilled at installing, managing, and supporting a set of products from a small set of vendors, and anything that breaks that mold is going to be difficult. The IT industrial complex that has analysts write reports about products your team apparently needs has conspired to make your team unable to introduce genuinely new information technology into your organization. And all of those products you do install, all of them are built for car world because they are products. They're not novel, they're not new, they're expensive, and by design, they are of yesterday. The second approach to digital transformation that organizations commonly try is the approach of the digerati. I've heard this called all sorts of things, but the general idea is that a digital organization is fundamentally different from a non-digital one, and that to really achieve digital transformation and benefit from it, you need to create an environment where people doing the digital stuff aren't hamstrung by all the tradition and legacy built into the organization. I'm going to admit here and now that even to me, even after seeing it go wrong so many times, to me this option still feels compelling. It feels compelling because often the fresh approach feels like it's what's really needed for an organization that's ossified. The great thing about this Digerati Club approach is that the early gains it makes will be remarkable. With the tools that are available today to digital teams, it's amazing just how fast applications for the internet age can be built. Whether it's design approaches that use collaborative tools to rapidly iterate through different alternatives, or continuous integration tools that mean deploying newly written and freshly tested software to the cloud is nearly instantaneous. The initial speed excuse me, at which new things can happen will feel like a win. Exciting, fresh approaches will make your organization feel like it's done the right thing. But what's the end game? We'll come back to that because it won't be long before the organizational antibodies kick in and the effect of the digerati bogs down. It'll come with talk about security and talk about compliance and audit. It'll be wrapped in policy and good intentions, but come it will. At its heart, corporate policy tends to be a repository of mitigations against things that have previously gone wrong. If you want to know what thing your organization is afraid of going wrong, then all you need to do is read its policies. Policy embeds and ossifies the worst fears of the organization. But how does that impact the new digital team? If you're in this situation and you've created a digital organization, it's almost certain that some of the devices in this old friend will arise, and policies will get invoked. For example, having deployed some new shiny application and wowed the executive layer of your organization, someone will pipe up with an issue about something. I can't predict what it'll be, but there will be something. The application might be running on Amazon Web Services, and someone will pipe up and ask how Amazon was selected as a vendor. And then the security team will ask for the various compliance information that Amazon themselves provide. And the IT team will point out that the digital people over there could use the corporate private Azure instance because it would be far more efficient to do that than to answer all these questions from all over the organization. Another well-meaning exec will agree, and pretty soon the sharp engineers in the new digital team won't be writing code anymore. They'll be attending meetings and preparing a knowledge base because they'll have to pass a service readiness review that was originally designed to deal with things like the SharePoint upgrade. And they'll need to do that because it'll be a policy somewhere that it has to be done to get approval to put the app onto a production network with some internet transit. And then those amazing designers and developers will all get frustrated and they will all quit and you'll be stuck. This happens every time, not because people mean to do bad things, but because the behaviors and activities that worked in Car World don't work in Andreessen World. And we really don't know what Andreessen World will look like in the end. Unless your end game is that the digital organization will completely take over the old organization, approach 2 will fail. And if you say that is your end game, I kind of don't believe you. You've not thought it through. Because unless you're literally the boss and your position is completely secure, your desire for the digital child to swallow the traditional parent will not be allowed to happen. Your management team's interests will kick in, your own interests will kick in, because doing it flies in the face of every single thing that you, your team, and your board knows, and it won't be tolerated. And so having tried and failed at approaches 1 and 2, we come to approach 3, the approach that I wouldn't tell you about until I'd had the chance to give you the background information that you needed to understand the world you're in. Because approach 3 is all about recognizing what an epochal transition is all about, and understanding that a program of transformation won't get you to a final destination that no one yet even has the tools to imagine. The scaffolding of tomorrow is already there, but we're trying to use it incorrectly, because we're trying to use it like we might have done for the world of yesterday. But what does it look like when used by the world of tomorrow? In the early 1700s, there was a migrating pool of wage labor available to agriculture, and that large labor pool went from farm to farm, region to region, to assist in the various seasonal tasks that were required, as they were required. And the advent of the Industrial Revolution reduced the need for them. They didn't necessarily retrain and become traction engine specialists or steam boiler repair people. The agricultural reliance on their migrating behaviors changed, and consequently, the migrating population reduced and the urban population increased. That behavior change from migratory to urban was a big part of what was required for the second industrial revolution. And that behavior change, and the behavior changes we need now, mean that a new mindset is required, and that a culture change is needed, and may mean new skills and new people. I said that these were things that could be used to excuse any failure before, and they can be, but digital transformations generally don't start with these things. Most of them start with an analyst report on some tech that needs to be adopted, or a vague goal, or a maturity model, or some other artifact, and then blames these 3 things. We try to start the other way around instead. We start by establishing clear principles in an organization. Now, that word's often overused. People write down things they call principles all the time without understanding what the word really means. And there are things that cannot be compromised, because if we do compromise them, then by definition, they're no longer principles. I wouldn't work for an organization that asked me to compromise my integrity, or act dishonestly, or treat people without decency. Those things are principles. They're constraints upon our behavior. They compel us to act one way rather than another at every time of asking. But values are something different. They're the optimizations that we choose whenever we make a decision. And it's at this point when most organizations step in and say they already have a list of values and a strong culture. And our response is always, really? It's not to say that I can say without looking, but I'm guessing that your values are probably full of things that a lot of people treat as platitudes, like always do your best, or value centricity, or teamwork. And they don't really mean as much as you'd like them to. And it's not to say that some things shouldn't be written down. Some things require it. Principles, especially when we don't know the right thing to do, big ideas that place guiding limits on our behavior are helpful things. But values are different. They change based on circumstance. For example, in my time as a software engineer, I was frequently asked to compromise quality to get something done as expeditiously as possible. The thing needs to be done quickly rather than perfectly, because people are waiting for it to be fixed. The challenge with listing values is that they're inherently in tension with each other. We sacrifice one at the altar of another, with good reason. And that doesn't make us hypocrites. The trade-off of values, one against the other, is literally what it means to make good or bad decisions. That's not to say there aren't values and more appropriate optimizations in Andreessen World. There are. So we use about 40 behavioral guidelines that successful digital organizations tend to reflect when you examine how they make decisions. They capture the value optimizations that are right more often than they're wrong. There are things like establishing a bias towards action or learning from data. These things work to nudge behaviors in a direction that helps organizations to operate while recognizing uncertainty about what the future holds. Because it's not just for the IT nerds in one corner or the cool kids in another. If you can remove the constraints from a new part of the organization, like you might do in Approach 2, then you can remove those constraints from a part that already exists. Give them big guidelines in the form of principles. Don't break the law, be honest, act decently, that kind of stuff. And then free them to act as they need to do the job better. The best place to start is with an existing team, and the right time to start is now. Start living change, removing the constraints. Build awareness of how they deliver value, and insist that they're ruthless in discarding legacy behaviors and tools. Help them make better decisions by figuring out the values that they're optimizing for every time they make a decision. And I know that's really scary because you'll break things that seem to be working fine. But the things you're afraid to break aren't actually working fine, and they never will become fine again without intervention, because we're not in car world anymore. There are no measurements we can rely upon. There are no big changes we can make in a predictable way. And what you change now, you will likely need to change again in the near future. Evaluate yourself, your team, or your entire organization against those 40 guiding behaviors. Give yourself a RAG rating against them. And once you've done that, you can start to think about how to change things from red to green. What does your organization need to do to alter itself? Which of your behaviors should you change? As we've helped rebuild organizations so they can adapt to this new digital world, we've built an approach that seems to work more often than not, but we find new problems all the time, and we learn new things every time, and it changes every time. The first industrial revolution took nearly 100 years from start to finish, and the second industrial revolution took a similar amount of time. Car world reached its pinnacle with the first digital revolution, where we were applying the tools of tomorrow to the problems of yesterday, and we can probably expect the second digital revolution to take at least that long. If you're tweaking your organization and thinking there's a golden road to follow, then I'm here to remind you that not only is there not a wizard, there's not even an Emerald City. Not yet. Digital transformations fail, not because organizations do them wrong. They fail because they think they know the end goal. They fail because their organization is designed to do absolutely anything and everything, and ultimately, it's designed to do nothing at all. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to what I had to say. I really hope it's been useful, and I hope that it helps you think a little bit differently about your organization and how to make that work a little bit better. And I'm looking forward to taking any of your questions in the Q&A next.